You know that feeling when you're at a restaurant and someone at the next table starts loudly talking about taking back something that clearly isn't theirs? Like, I'm taking back this salad bar because my great-grandfather built the sneeze guard. And then they start explaining to the entire restaurant how unfairly they've been treated by the management while gesturing dramatically with a breadstick. Well, congratulations, because that awkward dinner conversation just became American foreign policy, and somehow we're all trapped at the same restaurant. Because this week, we need to talk about Donald Trump's latest promise to take back the Panama Canal. Yes, the Panama Canal. The engineering marvel that connects two oceans, handles trillions of dollars in global trade, and apparently now needs to be rescued from Panama, the country whose name is literally in the canal's name. It's like someone trying to take back the Statue of Liberty from New York because France helped build it, or demanding the return of the Lincoln Tunnel because your uncle once paid a toll there. And before you ask, yes, this is really happening. This isn't some fever dream brought on by too much cable news and holiday eggnog. A sitting US president has genuinely suggested that America should reclaim a waterway that we voluntarily handed over 25 years ago through proper legal channels. It's like returning a rental car and then showing up at the lot 3 years later, demanding your keys back because you didn't like the gas prices. And look, at first glance, this might seem like just another one of Trump's rhetorical flourishes. You know, like when he talks about buying Greenland or making Canada the 51st state. Standard Tuesday material for a man who apparently views the world map as his personal wish list on Amazon. But this time, there's something genuinely alarming about the specificity and persistence of his claims. According to multiple news reports, Trump first raised the Panama Canal issue in December 2024, telling a crowd at Turning Point USA's America Fest in Phoenix that we're being ripped off at the Panama Canal like we're being ripped off everywhere else. He called America's handover of the canal in 1999 foolish and suggested his administration might try to regain control. The crowd apparently cheered at this prospect because nothing says "Make America Great Again" quite like threatening to invade your neighbors over shipping fees. Then, in his inaugural address just last month, he doubled down, saying China is operating the Panama Canal and we're taking it back. And just to make sure everyone understood he wasn't kidding, he followed up by posting a picture on Truth Social showing an American flag over the canal with the caption, "Welcome to the United States Canal," which is roughly equivalent to posting a photo of your neighbor's house with "Welcome to my house," and expecting that to hold up in court. Now, the immediate reaction from many Democrats was to point out the obvious historical and legal problems with this statement. Panama's president, José Raúl Mulino, responded firmly that the sovereignty and independence of our country are not negotiable, and that every square meter of the canal belongs to Panama, which, you know, is accurate given that we literally signed a treaty about this. But here's where it gets interesting, and by interesting, I mean deeply concerning. When pressed about whether he would rule out using military force to achieve his goals, Trump said at a Mar-a-Lago press conference, "I'm not going to commit to that. It might be that you'll have to do something." He added, "The Panama Canal is vital to our country, and we need them for economic security." So let me get this straight. The President of the United States is openly refusing to rule out military action against a democratic ally over a canal that we voluntarily transferred to them through a treaty that we signed, negotiated, and honored for decades. That's not foreign policy. That's the plot of a Michael Bay movie that got rejected for being too unrealistic. And Trump's justification for all this seems to rest on three main arguments. First, that Panama is charging excessive fees to American ships. Second, that China is somehow controlling the canal through its business operations there. And third, that the original handover was a mistake that needs to be corrected. Let's examine each of these claims, shall we? Starting with the fees argument, it is true that the Panama Canal Authority raised transit fees in 2024. But here's what Trump isn't telling you. These increases were directly caused by a historic drought that forced the canal to reduce the number of ships that could pass through each day. When you have fewer slots available, basic economics suggests that prices go up. It's supply and demand, not some nefarious plot against America. And let's put these fees in perspective. The canal charges based on a complex formula that takes into account vessel size, cargo type, and current capacity constraints. It's not like Panama woke up one morning and said, "You know what, let's stick it to the Americans today." These are sophisticated pricing mechanisms developed over decades to manage one of the world's busiest shipping lanes efficiently. Former Panama Canal Administrator Jorge Luis Quijano, who worked at the canal for decades, including during American administration, has explicitly stated that a ship with a Panamanian flag pays as much as an American-flagged ship. The rates are based on vessel size and cargo, not nationality. Large container ships can pay up to $1.2 million to transit the canal, but that's because they're massive floating cities carrying billions of dollars in goods, not because Panama has decided to stick it to America specifically. And honestly, when you consider that these ships are avoiding a weeks-long journey around South America, $1.2 million starts to look like a bargain. Moreover, the 1977 treaty that transferred the canal specifically prohibits Panama from giving preferential treatment to any particular country. So even if Panama wanted to give the US a discount, which given current tensions seems unlikely, they'd be violating the very agreement that governs the canal's operation. Now, let's talk about the China argument, because this is where things get particularly frustrating and, frankly, where Trump's relationship with basic facts takes a vacation. Trump has repeatedly claimed that China is operating the Panama Canal. This is, to put it diplomatically, not accurate. China does not operate the canal. The Panama Canal Authority, a Panamanian government agency, operates the canal. Full stop. What is true is that a Hong Kong-based company called Hutchison Ports operates 2 of the 5 ports adjacent to the canal, one on the Caribbean side and one on the Pacific side. They've been doing this since 1997, by the way, back when the US was still jointly managing the canal. So if this is Chinese infiltration, it's the slowest, most transparent infiltration in history. The other 3 ports are operated by companies from the United States, Singapore, and Taiwan. So unless we're counting Singapore and Taiwan as Chinese operations now, Trump's math doesn't add up. So when Trump says China is operating the Panama Canal, what he really means is that a Hong Kong company, which has been there for nearly 3 decades, runs some port facilities near the canal. It's like saying China operates Manhattan because there's a Chinese restaurant in Times Square, or that Italy controls Little Italy. The logic just doesn't hold. Now, are there legitimate concerns about Chinese investment and influence in Latin America? Absolutely. China has been expanding its economic footprint throughout the region for years, and that does raise strategic questions for the United States. But the solution to those concerns isn't to threaten military action against our allies. It's to engage more constructively with the region ourselves. The third argument, that the handover was a historical mistake, is perhaps the most revealing of Trump's worldview. The Panama Canal was transferred to Panama on December 31st, 1999, under treaties negotiated by President Jimmy Carter and signed in 1977. This wasn't some hasty decision made in a moment of weakness. It was the culmination of decades of tension, negotiation, and recognition that colonial control over another country's territory was both unsustainable and morally indefensible. And here's something Trump conveniently leaves out. The handover wasn't just Jimmy Carter's idea. The negotiations actually began under Republican President Gerald Ford, and the final treaties had bipartisan support in Congress. This was America at its diplomatic best, recognizing that maintaining colonial control over another nation's territory was incompatible with our stated values of self-determination and sovereignty. Let me give you some context here that Trump seems to conveniently forget. The United States originally acquired rights to build and operate the canal through the Hay-Bunau-Varilla Treaty of 1903, which was signed just days after Panama declared independence from Colombia. And here's the thing about that independence declaration. It happened with significant American support and involvement. We basically helped create Panama as a country so we could build our canal. It was geopolitical engineering at its most blatant. For 76 years, the United States operated the canal through the Panama Canal Zone, a 10-mile-wide strip of territory that was effectively American colonial possession in the middle of another sovereign nation. This arrangement created decades of tension and conflict, including anti-American riots in 1964 that left dozens dead and led to a temporary break in diplomatic relations. The 1977 treaties weren't just about transferring the canal, they were about recognizing Panama's fundamental sovereignty over its own territory. They included provisions for the canal's permanent neutrality and gave the United States the right to intervene militarily, if that neutrality was ever threatened. In other words, we already have legal mechanisms to address legitimate security concerns about the canal. And here's the crucial point that Trump's take-it-back rhetoric completely ignores. The canal transfer has been a remarkable success story. Under Panamanian management, the canal has been expanded, modernized, and made more efficient. Traffic has increased, transit times have decreased, and the waterway has continued to serve global commerce effectively. Panama has honored its commitments under the Neutrality Treaty, and the canal remains open to ships of all nations on equal terms. So why is Trump talking about this now? Well, I think there are several possible explanations, and none of them are particularly comforting. The most charitable interpretation is that this is classic Trump negotiating theatre. Make an outrageous opening demand to gain leverage in some other negotiation. Maybe he wants concessions on immigration policy, given that Panama is a key transit route for migrants heading north through the Darien Gap. Maybe he wants Panama to be more aggressive in blocking Chinese investment. Maybe he just wants lower canal fees for American ships. But here's the problem with that theory. Threatening to seize another country's territory isn't normal diplomatic pressure. It's the kind of language that undermines trust, destabilizes relationships, and makes our allies wonder whether they can count on American commitments. When you threaten to take back something you voluntarily gave up through a treaty, you're essentially saying that American agreements aren't worth the paper they're printed on. The second possibility is that Trump genuinely believes his own rhetoric about American victimhood and thinks the canal transfer was a terrible deal that needs to be reversed. This would be consistent with his broader worldview that America has been taken advantage of by crafty foreigners and needs to reassert its dominance through shows of force. The problem with this interpretation is that it ignores both the historical context of why the canal was transferred and the practical realities of modern international relations. You can't just undo decades of diplomatic agreements because you think your predecessors made bad deals. Treaties aren't business contracts that you can renegotiate at will. The third and most troubling possibility is that Trump is serious about territorial expansion and sees the canal as a test case for a broader policy of American imperialism. Remember, he's also talked about acquiring Greenland and annexing Canada. This isn't just about one canal, it's about fundamentally changing how America relates to the rest of the world. And that brings us to perhaps the most important question. What would actually happen if Trump tried to follow through on these threats? Let's start with the legal and diplomatic consequences. Any attempt to seize the Panama Canal would be a flagrant violation of international law, specifically the UN Charter's prohibition on the use of force against the territorial integrity of other states. It would violate the 1977 Panama Canal treaties, which the United States signed and ratified. And it would violate the Organization of American States Charter, of which both the US and Panama are members. The immediate diplomatic fallout would be catastrophic. Every Latin American country would view this as a return to the bad old days of American interventionism. The gunboat diplomacy that characterized US-Latin American relations in the early 20th century is exactly what regional leaders have spent decades trying to move beyond. Countries throughout the hemisphere would likely withdraw from security partnerships with the United States and seek closer ties with China and Russia as a counterbalance to American aggression. Economically, the consequences would be severe as well. The Panama Canal handles about 6% of global trade and 40% of US container traffic. Any military action that disrupted canal operations would send shockwaves through global supply chains and likely trigger a recession. The canal is especially crucial for US energy exports. Much of our liquefied natural gas destined for Asian markets travels through Panama. But let's say, hypothetically, that Trump decided to go ahead anyway. What would that actually look like militarily? And more importantly, has anyone in his administration actually thought this through? Well, Panama has a population of about 4.3 million people and no standing military. They abolished their armed forces in 1990 and rely on a national police force for security. In pure military terms, the United States could certainly overwhelm Panamanian resistance, but then what? Do we become the colonial power we spent the 20th century criticizing? Do we install a military governor? Do we hold elections and hope Panamanians vote for someone who likes having their country occupied? The canal is an incredibly complex piece of infrastructure that requires specialized knowledge to operate. You can't just send in the Marines and expect everything to work normally. The current workforce includes thousands of Panamanian engineers, technicians, and administrators who have spent their careers mastering the intricacies of canal operations. If you occupy the country by force, do you really think these people are going to show up for work the next Monday with enthusiasm? Are they going to maintain the complex computer systems, coordinate with international shipping companies, and manage the delicate water levels with the same dedication they showed when working for their own country? Moreover, the canal depends on a delicate ecological balance in the surrounding watershed. The locks work by gravity-feeding water from Gatun Lake, which requires careful management of the entire regional ecosystem. Military occupation would likely disrupt these environmental systems in ways that could take decades to repair. And then there's the question of what happens to the 14,000 ships that transit the canal each year. These vessels come from countries all over the world. Are Chinese container ships going to willingly pay transit fees to an American occupation force? Are European companies going to route their supply chains through what would essentially be stolen infrastructure? The more you think about the practical aspects of Trump's threat, the more absurd it becomes. This isn't like seizing an oil platform or occupying an airbase. The Panama Canal works because it's embedded in a complex web of international agreements, environmental systems, and economic relationships that would all be destroyed by military action. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of this whole discussion is what it says about American credibility and the rule of law in international relations. For over 75 years, the United States has been the primary advocate for a rules-based international order. We've insisted that countries resolve disputes through negotiation, not force. We've built institutions like the United Nations, NATO, and the World Trade Organization on the principle that might doesn't make right. Trump's casual threats to seize territory from democratic allies represents a fundamental repudiation of these principles. If America can decide unilaterally to ignore treaties and take whatever it wants, then why should anyone else respect international law? Why should China not seize Taiwan? Why should Russia not take more of Ukraine? Why should any country honor any agreement if the world's most powerful nation openly flouts its own commitments? And here's the thing that really gets me about this entire debate. It's completely unnecessary. The United States already has extensive influence over Panama Canal operations through the neutrality treaties. We have the legal right to intervene if the canal's neutrality is threatened. We have close security cooperation with Panama on counter-narcotics and immigration issues. We benefit enormously from the canal's efficient operation under Panamanian management. American companies use the canal extensively. American consumers benefit from the efficient flow of goods it enables, and American naval vessels have guaranteed transit rights. The arrangement works so well that most Americans probably never think about who operates the canal. They just expect their Amazon packages and imported cars to arrive on time, which they do, thanks to Panama's competent management. In other words, the current arrangement works. It works for America, it works for Panama, and it works for global commerce. The only thing Trump's threats accomplish is to destabilize a successful partnership and make our allies question whether they can trust American commitments. It's like threatening to divorce your spouse because you don't like how they load the dishwasher, except the dishwasher is a crucial piece of global infrastructure and your spouse has been doing a better job than you ever did. So what should we make of all this? I think there are a few key takeaways. First, words matter in international relations, especially when they come from the President of the United States. Trump's casual threats to seize territory aren't just bombastic rhetoric. They're destabilizing statements that undermine decades of careful diplomacy and alliance building. Second, the America First worldview that Trump espouses often leads to policies that actually weaken American influence and security. By threatening our allies and abandoning our commitments, we push other countries toward our competitors and rivals. Third, the rule of law in international relations isn't just an abstract principle, it's the foundation of the global order that has enabled American prosperity and security for generations. When we abandon that principle, we don't just hurt other countries, we hurt ourselves. And finally, there's something profoundly troubling about a president who looks at the world map and sees real estate opportunities rather than sovereign nations with their own rights and interests. That's not leadership, it's imperialism. And it's exactly the kind of thinking that has led to some of the darkest chapters in human history. The Panama Canal will remain under Panamanian control because that's what international law, treaty obligations, and basic respect for sovereignty require. The question is whether American foreign policy will be guided by these principles or by the whims of a president who seems to think he can redraw the world map through Twitter posts and rally speeches. Because ultimately, this isn't really about a canal in Central America. It's about what kind of country America wants to be and what kind of world we want to live in. Do we want to be a nation that honors its commitments and works within the international system we helped create? Or do we want to be a rogue state that takes whatever it wants through force and intimidation? The choice is ours, but we should make it with full awareness of the consequences. Because once you abandon the rule of law in international relations, it's very hard to get it back. And once your allies stop trusting you, they start looking for other partners who might not have America's best interests at heart. The Panama Canal has connected two oceans for over a century. Let's not let it become the thing that disconnects America from the rest of the world.